I created this, my planning and my planting of my gardens have gotten a lot easier, and the first one was a little bit difficult. It takes a little bit of time, but now my goal is within the next couple of years is to really have it hammered down so that I don't even have to think about it. I almost don't even have to plan a garden anymore. I can just go out and do it. So I'm talking, I know it's kind of cryptic, but what I'm talking about is creating planting groups. So here's my Brussels sprouts, by the way. I just looked at them for the first time in 2 weeks. So this is one of the candidates. We have a good solid planting group for here. We have a good solid planting group for this bed here. And we're looking to create a good one for this bed. And then the greenhouse, we just learned about a new one. It makes all the difference in the world when it comes to your planting. So what I'm referring to is creating a group of plantings that will complement each other. They're not necessarily on the companion planting list. They can absolutely fall on it, but they're not necessarily on it. But they work well together. They will not interfere with each other. And when I say groups, what I'm really referring to a couple things. I'm referring to a combination of plants within a group of planting in season, but I'm also referring to the next season when you replant that bed. And that's what's going to make it so much better. So I think the best way to do it is just to kind of show you, and unfortunately it's winter, so I don't have multiple seasons planted, but I'll take you through the garden beds that we have, and I'll tell you how we've got them grouped for in season and out of season and next season, and then how we plan to figure out the next one. So this one, for instance, this is our Brussels sprouts. And this isn't really one that we do in season grouping, but it's the next season that we are grouping it with. And we have this one figured out for 2 out of the 3 seasons. First things first, the reason why there's nothing else planted with is because we really like Brussels sprouts and we want to contain them as much as possible into one bed. Makes it easier for us to handle and all that stuff. And then the next thing is, even though we grow into 4 seasons, we call it 3 seasons because we're growing all of spring, all of summer, and all of fall into the winter. Into it. So there's a gap in the winter where you'll see things start to empty out, and we're trying to narrow that gap over time. But in this bed is Brussels sprouts. So let's just start with winter of this year, okay? Winter of this year, Brussels sprouts. Now the Brussels sprouts, we know after the past couple years, they're gonna come out somewhere between February and March. They'll start to come out. So we know there's not a lot of time for anything else to get in, and we also know that these are very nitrogen hungry plants. These need a lot of nitrogen in order to create the Brussels sprout. So what we do next is then we put squash behind that, and we'll let that grow out. So squash is an interesting one because it's not necessary, and when I say squash, what I really mean is zucchini. I don't like yellow squash, and it's not worth the trouble. But with the zucchini, I'll say it the way it's supposed to be said. It grows, if we plant it in April to May, all the way up until about July, it will grow, and we should be harvesting, right? Now, and by the way, we'll start our seeds a month before we plant them out. We'll start them inside. So if we do that, and then you look at it and you say, okay, but then we have from July into August, September, really September, we have 2 months until we can plant in the fall again. So what do we want to do with that, right? Well, there's a couple things that we can do, and I'm really starting to lean into cover cropping more. So we always have the option to put some buckwheat in to benefit our bees and just to kind of keep the soil activated and take some of the phosphates out of there. We can also leave it empty, and for instance, like this year, so this bed was planted the same way this year or last year as this bed is and the way it's going. So after we pulled our squash out, we have an option. We can put more squash in and run it, or we can let it sit for a month and we can come back and we can put, what we did is we put our rutabagas in there. We tried parsnips, but they got flooded out. So we're gonna go back to that a little bit. And then we put our garlic in here. Now, typically what I did, and if I do decide to grow onions again, I would put garlic and onions in the same bed. So this bed would automatically go Brussels sprouts, squash, garlic, onions, and then start the spring over the next year. Stay spring, but garlic and onions don't come out until June-ish here, late May, middle June, somewhere in there. So that kind of creates a whole thing, which is a perfect candidate for a cover crop at that point. Now, we learned a new planting this year, a new grouping. So let's go talk about that. So we're coming in the greenhouse here, and our experiment is officially over. So we've got our taters here. You can see I pulled them up. And the greens got bit by the frost hard, and we just didn't really want to waste any time and wait for them to come back. So we pulled them, and we went ahead and dropped our broccoli. And now we kind of fell into this one. Nothing I'd love more to say to you right now than not planning this the whole time, but I absolutely did not plan this. But the way it worked was we wanted to see if we could grow taters in here in the off season. And what we've come up with is we did 2 plantings. We were able to get a fall harvest, so we harvested our first taters, which wasn't many, but we didn't plant a lot. So we take that into account, but we were able to harvest them right around Christmas. So I pulled them and I said, you know what, I've got some more. Let me put them back in. I put them back in, and they got bit because they got 17 degrees. Well, at the same time, these broccoli plants were in here at 17 degrees and they didn't get phased. So that told me a couple things. One, and you can see, I mean, we put these in a couple days ago and they have perked up nicely. These are really good as a pairing. So early fall, enjoys a little bit of heat, can take some cold, stays a little bit warmer in here. We can get this all the way through. We start our broccoli right around October. Would be a good time to start them, middle to end of October. Get our broccoli going, start them in the greenhouse, leave them in seed trays, harvest this, plant this. You can see we've got broccoli going all the way down. And this was the original goal, but this was an afterthought that we decided to take on. From now on, in here, this is the route we're going to take. So next year in the fall, what you're going to see, because you're subscribed and you love Sandy Bottom Homestead and all that stuff, we put our potatoes over here, and then we'll put broccoli in behind it. And then what I really want to do is I want to find another pairing for over here. Our greens and stuff do really good in here, so we're probably going to stick with that. And then that way we can have taters and greens and then broccoli and all that good stuff. The first hurdle, or the final hurdle for the broccoli, is really going to be how is it going to take the temperature fluctuations in here as we get into the warmer weather. So right now it's going to be fine, but I'm in coastal North Carolina. It's 40 degrees outside, and when the sun was hitting us earlier, it was easy 70 degrees in here. So we have to manage that, and we have to manage our heat a little bit, but this time of year it's a little bit easier because we can open doors and windows and stuff like that and get cool air flowing in here. Now I don't even have to plan one half of this greenhouse anymore. I automatically know what I'm going to put in. That speeds things up because now I can focus on other groupings, right? I can focus on something different. So let's go look at another one. This is another one of my favorite groupings. This one will take you through a full year. So in here, because we've had these covers on for so long, we've got our turnip greens in here, turnips. I don't really eat the greens too much, but I will. But if you come in here, I haven't looked in here, but there are going to be, yeah, there's turnips in here, and all the way down there's going to be some turnips. So this grouping right here, so in this bed we have radishes, we have turnips. You could also put a rutabaga in there, kohlrabi, any kind of root you could put in there. And what that gives you is, because they are a little bit more tender, that naturally they're going to start struggling around this time of year. You know, if we left this cover off and we get this cold that we're about to get, that'd be all she wrote. So we leave the cover on, we'll come out. After that, we'll come in, we'll harvest everything out of it, right? And then we're going to leave it empty for about 2 weeks, roughly. Just about, maybe 3 weeks. We'll leave it empty. We'll get the soil active again. We'll pre-fertilize it. And then we're going to put our taters in. And so our white taters are going to go in there, and then we're going to grow those out. Now those will grow until about June. We'll harvest them, and then I'll come back. The day I harvest them, I'm going to drop buckwheat in there, grow my buckwheat out, and then in August to September, somewhere in there, Brussels sprouts. And so now you can see how this goes, and then what goes after the Brussels sprouts, the squash. And so this is going through this whole cycle through these beds. So now I don't have to think about this bed, or half of the greenhouse, hopefully all of the greenhouse. So I can now focus on pairings in the other beds as well. Now we have to figure out another one that I really want to kind of make a staple into my garden. And we did, that's one of the reasons why we moved the garden beds over here instead of getting rid of them, was because we wanted to really make corn a staple inside of our garden. Thing says summer like corn and tomatoes and peppers, right? There's just something about it. So we want to figure it out. And what we did last year is, it was this bed. We had our garlic and onions in this bed. We harvested them in June. Then we put our corn in, and we were actually able to get a slight, not perfect, not great, actually worthless harvest of popcorn. That's a different story. It was because it was popcorn, but we were able to get a harvest out of it. The only issue with that, in the fact that garlic, onions, and corn are all super high nitrogen feeders. So that means that we were having issues getting nitrogen to it. And so we need to kind of make a plan for it and say, okay, that's a pairing that's not really going to work, but what would work and what would get things out of the garden at the right time. So in this bed, we have bok choy, kale, collards, and mustard greens at this point. So our bok choy will all be harvested within the next 2 weeks, more than likely. And then our kale and our collards and our mustards, the mustards will go a little bit earlier, but everything else should last well into spring, all the way up until the next planting season starts. And then what we'll do is we're going to put all of our lettuce into the front half of this bed. All of that will come out right around May, and then we can turn right around and we plan to drop our corn in here. So that it gives us time so we can get our corn in right around May, grow it. We could even let it sit for a week or two and refill it, revitalize it if we need to, refertilize it, and top dress it, whatever we need to do, and then we can get growing again in there. And so that's something that we're working on, and I'm hoping that this pairing will work together because everything kind of falls into place. Corn needs to be a little bit warmer to plant, so we can use that to our advantage, whereas we can get our tomatoes and stuff in a little bit early, and the kale and the collards, while we can still harvest from it, we would be losing our groceries. And in turn, one of the goals that we've had is lowering that dearth period that we get harvest from. So this would eliminate that, and we wouldn't have that gap in which we get a harvest in between seasons. So it would help narrow that gap down. Now this is something that we really want to have happen and figure it out. The other pairing that works well with this is lettuce into sweet potatoes. So take your lettuce out. You have, we don't plant our sweet potatoes until like mid-May or early to mid-May. So we can grow our lettuce in as long as we want, and even the rest of the plants in here. So that's another pairing we can have. So we have these 4 empty beds right now. We can easily do 2 beds like this and then do 2 beds of corn, whatever we want. We can figure that out, and then you can see if we really decide, hey, we want to grow a lot of corn, we can work that through. We have these empty canvases here that need to be filled and irrigation set up still. But once we get those in place, we're going to start working immediately. We're going to start working on pairings from the get-go. One of the half pairings that I have, for instance, is like this bed and this bed will both be sweet potatoes. And then what we'll do after the sweet potatoes are harvested is we're going to come back and we're going to put broccoli and cabbage in, and we'll probably do a bed of broccoli here and a bed of cabbage here. And that's why we wanted to extend, because now we have more space to do so. And then we can pull those out. Those can be harvested right around this time of year. They start to get harvested, and then start all the way over again, let them rest, recharge. And then we need to figure out what the next planting will be. Figure out that next planting, now we have a full year. And so you can see how this is, it started off small. And then once we got 1, we did 2, and then we did 3, 4, 5. And so the goal is to have, I'd say we've got 11 beds. We want to have about 8 beds figured out. And then we can really get going. Now, the greenhouse one is very special because that wouldn't work out here. because of the planting season. So it's specialized to the greenhouse, right? Even the low tunnels, it wouldn't work out great, but we still have that option. So if you do any kind of groupings or pairings like this, let us know what they are and go through. And again, what you focus on is not just, is it a companion or not? That's not what I'm talking about by any stretch of the imagination. What it is when is it harvested? When can it go in the ground, or in order? When can it go in the ground? When is it harvested? What nutrients does it need? And then finally, what are the fertilization requirements for it? So what nutrients does it need and what fertilization requirements are two different things. What nutrients does it need is it a high feeder, nitrogen feeder? Is it a high potassium feeder? And if that's the case, then if you feed it and you come back and you put something in that needs the same nutrient at high levels, you're going to struggle. But if I come back and I say, hey, my potatoes are high potassium feeders, I can come back and put a high nitrogen feeder in behind it, then you start to see that, right? Squash is a very, like with the Brussels sprouts, squash isn't a very high nitrogen feeder. So this is a high nitrogen feeder, so we don't need all of that nitrogen in the soil. We can add what we need, but we don't need all of it. Goodbye.